blast from the past. We're jumping back exactly 100 years today for our, I think, the first black and white movie we've talked about on the podcast.
Yeah. You know what's great? When I was writing my notes, I always write the title and then the year. I confidently wrote Nosferatu 2022.
So it's 100 years old. Yeah. It's black and white. It's silent. And it's under an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. It's completely, I mean, it's a whole other world. It almost feels like a different medium from modern movies.
It didn't feel like watching a movie. Yeah,
no, it
was a different experience. It was cool. I really liked it.
Yeah, I mean, before we even talk about the movie or the plot or all the little details, what did you think of just consuming, I guess, to use the worst word in the English language, a piece of art from this time period, something that is so different from what we usually talk about and experience?
Well, first of all, it was hard to wrap my brain around it being 100 years old. Like, understanding time is always, a challenge if you really think about it, but it's only until recently that we've been able to think about movies from 100 years ago, because before it was like, 100 years ago was the 1900. They were still horse and carriage and that was it, you know? So that was like weird, like, this is literally 100 years old. But also I think I made a comment when we were watching it. I was like, I know they had movies before World War II, but in my head, you kind of don't think about that. Mm-hmm. Like, it's like there was World War I, Roaring 20s, World War II, movies, Hollywood, 1950s, like
Orson Welles and Hitchcock,
Mad Men times. And so it just, and so I just don't think about that very much. So I was like, wow, this is like, and then you made the point. You were like, this is Downton Abbey times, this is Peaky Blinders times, like Great Gatsby. Like it was just, but like really it's cool to think about that.
It's such a weird bridge time between like Downton Abbey, Peaky Blinders times, and like a couple years after this is when Batman was invented.
Yeah, like it's a weird time in history because it's such a transitional moment from what we think of as olden days into like our modern society. Like that's a really simplified way to say it, but it was just interesting to think about the history. And also what was really weird for me, Dracula, the book, was written in like 1898.
Oh wow.
And so this is not that long after the book was published. So that was also really weird for me to think about. I was like, this is 20 years later? Like that's not that long. Right. Like it's just weird. Like cuz you think about, I don't think about Dracula as being written so late. In my head it's like I know it was written in 1898, but I always like put it with Frankenstein in like 1820. And so it's very weird.
So it's like 25 years separating the book coming out and the movie. Yeah. That's like Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
The show came out, I mean, roughly 25 years after the first book.
And I ended up doing a lot of research on the history of this film, so we could talk about that in a minute. But just to answer your original question, it didn't feel like watching a normal movie. It was trippy to think about the history and the time period. And especially at the beginning of the movie, it felt a lot like a comic book. Like the way that, because there's no dialogue and there's no sound, like there's just some music playing. And it's just like quick scenes, like quick shots of like setting up what's happening. Someone's walking to some place. This is the house that we're in. This is the character. Like it reminded me a lot of that. And I thought that was really cool.
I totally agree. They're almost more shots than they are scenes.
Right.
Because they're so brief. It's like all really action short, by action.
Yeah, short clips. Like sometimes it's more drawn out, like when it's having a more dramatic effect. But yeah, it was really different than most other movies, especially when you think of old movies, because usually like old movies, by the time they had dialogue and stuff, they're always these like long, exhausting shots that don't change and they're static and you get bored. But this was really different from that. It was a cool experience.
I feel like I didn't have any sort of adjustment period. I feel like I was comfortable about 30 seconds in.
Yeah, I was all set.
The graphic novel I just finished, which I'm working on, I'm about to send out to publishers, is almost exactly the format of this.
Yeah,
and I'm glad you made the comic comparison, because the project I just finished is black and white. It's formatted like a silent film, where it doesn't have text balloons or anything. The text is very minimal and on its own page, separated from the visual. And it's black and white. You talk about developing contrast and moving from grays to harsher blacks and whites, and it's shorter scenes because it is a comic.
Yeah,
it was interesting that I felt like I was already tapped into the visual language because I've spent 6 months in this world. So I don't know if that made me almost numb to some of what they were doing here, or if I was more tuned in to what was happening on a technical level.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Because those individual shots being just actions instead of fully formed, more dynamic scenes, that's the same as a comic panel. Because you can show just about one action in whatever's happening. You can use motion lines or whatever. And I wonder if there's been, I probably should have looked into this before recording it, if there's been a comic adaptation of Nosferatu, because I feel like it lends itself perfectly to that medium.
That would be cool. I haven't come across I didn't come across a mention of that when I was doing my research, but my research was pretty base level, so I don't know.
Also, it might just be called Dracula or whatever. There's so many permutations of this story.
That's the thing. Yeah. Yeah, and I was surprised at how scary this movie is. Like, you know, a lot of parts were silly, and like the guy playing Harker was. You said he was doing slapstick.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that for a second? Because
sure.
I developed that idea a little more. So. Yeah, Harker, he's the first character you see, and he is the bulk of the movie. He sort of fades away towards the end, which happens in all of these adaptations.
Because that's how the story goes.
But he is, and you talked about this, because it's a silent film, there is an overacting. You have to be so expressive that it doesn't always need a flash of dialogue to explain what's happening.
I mean, it's like stage acting, you know. You have to overdo your facial expressions.
Right, but there was a silliness to what he was doing. I mean, it was slapstick. He made himself comically oblivious and cocky. He was very goofy and loose. I mean, he was moving like Kramer for half the movie.
Yeah, and when he's leaving, he's like, "Nothing's gonna happen to me."
Right, and
I mean, we don't hear him say it, but that's the vibe I got from his movements.
You can. That's how you discover tone in a silent movie, is reading the physicality into the cold dialogue in the next panel or image that you see.
Yeah.
And the question I came away with was, does Harker's slapstick heighten or undercut the horror of the movie?
I mean, for me, it undercuts it. But I could see an argument being made the other way.
Because that was my thought too at first, that it undercut it. Because when he finally takes the situation seriously and he sees the spookiness of Nosferatu, he's not like hiding under the hat or whatever. When the confrontation truly begins, Harker's reactions are so huge that it's the same energy he was giving to the slapstick, and he's still flailing around.
Yeah.
He's just not smiling anymore.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like a book being written in all caps, where it's almost numbing or one note. So initially I thought, well, maybe it does undercut and sort of cheapen the horror. But the longer I thought about it, I don't think that's the point of his character. I don't think Harker is supposed to be our emotional anchor as an audience, where we follow his emotions and we take that as a cue for the tone of the scene.
Do you mean in the story of Dracula or in this specific
movie?
this
adaptation. Okay. I don't think any adaptation of Dracula ever tries to adapt the book.
No.
I think they take the first 20 minutes and then riff an ending. Because I've literally never seen an adaptation try to do the book's ending, because the book's ending's bad. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
I don't think that Harker is supposed to be an emotional anchor, but I think he's more of a tonal foil for Nosferatu.
Okay.
Because Harker is flailing and thrashing around the screen in all of his scenes.
Yeah.
But Nosferatu only ever moves in slow motion. He is creeping dread. I mean, he moves his hands up very slowly. His back is always arched. He only ever creeps forward. You can barely even see his legs move. So he is this creeping dread versus this flailing, exasperated Harker.
Sure.
It makes Nosferatu almost a force more than a character, where he builds up this sense of inevitability. It reminded me a lot of It Follows, the horror movie that came out a couple years ago. It's like the bad thing in the movie is like an STD that's transferred from person to person, but it manifests in these freaky creatures that just very slowly walk and follow you, and you can never outrun them, so you just have to keep moving. So it's a chase scene, but it's so slow and tranquil that it's dreadful.
Sure.
It's not scary. It's like bothersome.
Yeah. Well, and it just, because, Harker is not the only one who's flailing around. Nina's flailing around, like not as much, but everyone else is being pretty dramatic with their movements. And so with Nosferatu not being that way, it makes him appear unnatural in the context of the film.
It's the contrast between these two lead characters that it gives Nosferatu this eerie sense of calm. And It also reminds me of Michael Myers in the original 1978 Halloween, where everyone's running away from him and he's just slowly walking behind them.
Yeah, totally.
I feel like this is absolutely a bit of that DNA.
That's great. That's really good.
Because that's all teenagers screeching and running and throwing stuff.
And acting poorly.
Right.
You know, like, especially the one who's babysitting the girl. Like, she's like the one in the laundry room. I can't remember her name. Doing the worst acting job ever.
But Nosferatu's got this like blank white face and doesn't talk.
Sure.
And he slowly follows you and you know he's going to kill you. So he's more of a proto Michael Myers than he is. It's not at all a cat and mouse game like the book is.
Right.
It's an interesting translation of the story.
Like that. Interesting. Can we talk? I mean, I can throw in my history of the movie kind of wherever. I think talking about it as a translation of Dracula is interesting. Do you mind if I go into that?
Yeah, sure.
So, you know, when we watch this movie, in the subtitles, you know, the title cards, whatever you call them, the parts with the words, the characters are named Harker and Dracula and, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Westenra.
Yeah.
His wife.
So
That's so funny. You see the way the credits were?
Yes.
It was just like first name, comma, his wife.
Yeah, incredible. Well, my favorite was that when Harker had to leave town, he had to leave his wife with guardians. Like she could, like she needed chaperones to survive.
The play date.
It was so funny. Okay, but anyway, so this is obviously an adaptation of Dracula, but it was an unauthorized and unofficial adaptation. The director and the people who made the movie did not get the rights, and so they changed all the names. And this is a German production, so in the original film with the original subtitles and stuff, Dracula's name is Count Orlok, Harker is named Hutter, Mina is named Ellen, and Van Helsing's not even there. I mean, he's not there in this one either, obviously.
No, he's there. He's the professor.
I think he's meant to be someone else.
I mean, he's played as sort of a combo of Dr. Seward and Van Helsing. Yeah. Because he is that sort of font of knowledge.
Yeah. But anyway, it's just, and it's set in Germany rather than Britain. It's also set in the late 1830s instead of the 1890s, which makes sense because I was looking at Harker's wife's hair and I was like, that does not look like 1890s. And that's
the curls?
Yeah. It reminded me of like, 1838. And so it was not, so they were trying to like get away with doing it without getting the rights to it. And obviously Stoker's family was not happy. So Bram Stoker was dead by this point, but his wife was alive. And so she obviously sued the filmmakers. And so by court order, all the copies of the film were destroyed. But obviously some survived because we still have the movie today and it had already been distributed. So what that means is that it was kind of like re-released and like re-put together and like the original score was lost, so there's like been re-recording, so there are multiple versions of the movie. So whatever version we watched is not the definitive version. There are other versions, like obviously there's ones that are in German because it was a German movie, but even like among English translated versions, the text in the books that they're reading are different. Some of the dialogue is different.
It's like the first folio of Shakespeare.
Yeah, so like it doesn't follow like copyright rules the way we think about it today. Because I remember thinking, I was like, this score is like, I mean, it's great, but there are parts where it's like not matching what's going on. And I'm like, I feel like they could have done better for this. That would have made that a better moment, moment. And I think it's just because it was like another score that was just kind of thrown on it because the original was lost. And I just didn't realize it was so unofficial and like there was all this messiness to it.
It's basically a bootleg.
Exactly.
Surviving from the lost original. But I mean, that is how Shakespeare exists now.
Yeah.
We don't have, I mean, the fact that Macbeth is so much shorter than all of the other plays doesn't necessarily mean that was a stylistic choice. And Shakespeare was just feeling efficient that week because he banged out 8 of these a year.
Right.
It might be that it's only recollections of people who saw the play later trying to write things down, and you cobble those together. Exactly. And that is all we have for some of these.
That's the same thing as, like, that's what Homer is. Like, that's,
right,
you
but
know.
we treat the current texts of Shakespeare like they are gospel. We read artistic intent into them, and every punctuation mark as being the mark of genius, when we have no idea what the fuck the original looked like.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are, I mean, they're teaching computer programs now to learn turns of phrase and writing styles. to try to learn authorship from some of these disputed plays of that era.
Oh, wow.
Which is why a couple years ago they gave Shakespeare an attribution on one of these lesser known plays.
Oh, wow. Sort of like a handwriting expert. But
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
AI. That's cool.
So I love the impermanence of that.
Yeah.
Because as much as I revere Shakespeare, I like that there's a messy, almost an oral history of all of these things. Because if you read Shakespeare, you're getting one experience of Macbeth. If you watch Shakespeare, I would say you're probably getting a better version.
Yeah.
But when you remember it later, it's a different version too. Like the experience is so fractal anyway. Looking at a story like Dracula or Frankenstein or Faustus, that I'm never going to not stick it in there.
Nope.
That has been interpreted and twisted and shaped for so many cultures for centuries. I don't think there is one mother text for any of those stories anymore. So I sort of like that the source itself is compromised.
Yeah.
Because it makes all of these interpretations fun and valid and interesting.
Right.
I almost like how broken this version of Nosferatu is.
Well, right. Yeah. And, it's as frustrating as it is that I'm not ever going to see the original version Nosferatu as it was released in Germany in 1922. Like, I'm okay with it because it has been rethought of and reframed in the last 100 years, and it has this like cultural potency, and it, certain images live in our heads pretty starkly, like the one of him coming up the stairs and all that. But then there's all this, there are different colors in different versions. Like some are tinted blue, some are tinted more brown, some are tinted, ours was like true black and white, the one we watched, but some have like different color tints which change your whole thing. Some have obviously different music, and so it kind of doesn't matter because it's been so retranslated over time, like this 100-year game of telephone.
Exactly.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. And this did, there were parts of this that you and I were kind of joking during the movie because it is silent, so you can do that.
And it's funny because it's a 100-year-old movie.
But the imperfections and sort of, what we're jokingly calling bootleg qualities of this, they were incredibly charming. The fact that the text was never centered. It was usually a word or two was just hanging off the side of the screen.
Well, and it would hold on the shot for way too long, only to then cut to the next one and it's 3 words. You're like, really? You couldn't fit this all in one?
And we would see the text repeated way too often, and it would hang for like 30 seconds on screen.
Yeah, it was insane.
The music had these strange gaps sometimes, or the volume would just peak and it would just be wailing for 10 minutes
no reason
during nothing. I found all those moments very memorable and human, versus sort of the endlessly reshot, edited, fixed art today that has this inhuman, computerized, your eyes glaze over. It feels so plastic and perfect. I would much rather have the film grain, the screwed up lighting, the words hanging over the side, because it feels like work, effort, and passion. As much as slapstick Harker kind of fucked up the tone of the movie, his effort was palpable. The man was sweating through this performance. And that's what I want. I want people to hustle.
He was going for it.
Exactly. And I felt that sort of genuine passion in all of the decisions and mistakes of this work of art. It kind of it makes it better. Like if an actor on stage screws up a line, so they riff something for a second, or they build it into the performance. If they trip over something, or they drop a sword in an important moment, it brings the whole thing to life again.
Right.
Because they have to react. They're not just going through the motions. And this felt remarkably alive. I really liked it.
Yeah. Like, because it felt so. The people who made this, it was like they had just started this production studio in Germany, and they were going to do like all kinds of films that had to do with like the occult and like weird, creepy, horror things. And so this is that production studio's first film, but then they had to declare bankruptcy after the lawsuit from Harker's widow, and so they never made any other films. But so like, it has this like scrappy Evil Dead quality to it of like, this is our first movie, like we're just
the thrill of copyright infringement.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because they couldn't get the rights because they couldn't afford it.
Early piracy.
So they're like, we'll just change the name, we'll change the ending, and we'll cut Van Helsing. It'll be fine.
Change Mina to Nina. No one will know.
Well, no, it was Ellen actually. The one we watched, she was Nina. But yeah. I mean, Harker to what is it, Hutter? Yeah, like okay. Although I do like Count Orlok. That's really cool.
Sure.
And then I just think of Count Olaf. He keeps coming up in our discussions.
Does he?
Yeah, we talked about Lemony Snicket a few weeks ago.
Sure.
Okay. Anyway.
So what else about Dracula?
Well, also I learned more about the producer and production designer, Albin Grau, who like did the movie. He was in charge. I don't remember who directed it, but this guy.
F.W. Marno?
Yeah. But this guy was like in charge.
I definitely screwed that up a little.
Whatever. It's German. Okay. So Albin Grau was a lifelong student of the occult. And he was a member of the Fraternitas Saturni, which is the like Saturn, like Brothers of Saturn or Brotherhood of Saturn. It's like this. It was this German magical order which was founded in 1926. It's one of the oldest continuously running magical groups in Germany. They are all about the study of esotericism, mysticism, and magic in the cosmic sense. They think about astrological and Luciferian teachings versus like tarot compared to other Western magical orders. And they also propagate the ideals of freedom, tolerance, and fraternity. So it's like he's like this part of this like weird brotherhood thing, and like was like this weird dude who wanted to make this really weird movie. And I think that's really cool and interesting, and it makes sense why that production company wanted to do all kinds of other weird funky stuff. But I just I don't know, it's funny to think like what's a modern comparison, like because right now we're in 2022. What's a book that was written in 1998? Chamber of Secrets. Like some occultist wants to do a Chamber of Secrets adaptation.
Yeah.
Like it's funny. I don't know. I just thought and I mean that's mostly the research that I was looking into was just the copyright stuff and the initial thought
production
behind
history,
making the movie. And like they only had one camera. And so there was only one original negative.
It shows.
Yeah, it does show. Also,
F.W. Murnau.
Okay.
That was close.
That was close.
Sure.
I also learned that Nosferatu was the first film to show a vampire dying from exposure to sunlight. Other films and books and stuff had vampires be sensitive to sunlight and like weaken. Like that's what happens in Dracula is he's weakened by the sunlight. But this one, that's how he dies. And so that becomes like a big cultural understanding and belief about vampires later on. So I thought that was interesting.
What'd you think of that? If you want to talk about the ending for a second.
Yeah, because the ending is so basically the ending in the movie is Nina, what the fuck? She decides to sacrifice herself.
Yeah.
And, so that Dracula can be killed. Dracula sucks her blood, is having a great old time, forgets that the sun is rising. The sun rises, comes through the window, and he disappears and dies. And then Mina also dies. And that's it. Versus like having to stab people through the heart and cut off the heads and all that.
It's almost like he dies on a technicality.
Yeah.
Like he shouldn't have tried to bite her so close to dawn and he just gets caught. But he keeps looking out the window at the rising sun. Yeah. And then he keeps going. And then he just gets roasted.
Yeah, it was odd. I mean, on the one hand, they're obviously going for a cheaper ending because they don't have to film a big bloody stabby scene. But
like the version in the book sucks too, and also feels like a technicality because they just catch him while he's in transit and stab him while he's in the coffin. Like they hunt down the Amazon delivery truck.
Tracking number.
It's wildly unsatisfying in the book too.
Yeah.
And like the book, this ending feels terribly abrupt.
It did feel really abrupt. I was like, oh.
But I do like that they trimmed the cast. I think it had a good focused quality.
I did like that.
It was basically Harker, Nina, or Mina. Harker, Mina, Nosferatu, and Renfield.
Yes.
And they minimized Van Helsing, Westenra, Seward. I mean, if not completely deleting them from the narrative.
Yeah, and then there's like Quincy and someone else. They're cut out too.
But there's no... Yeah, he's kind of the tomboy. Why did my brain tell me to say that?
I don't know.
But they don't use a stake. There's not real combat.
No, there's
like
there's no
the
violent
original.
combat. And like even, instead of in Dracula is like turning other people into vampires.
Right.
And like building up a little
His
army.
wives, right.
Yeah. But in this, he's just killing people. And so everyone thinks it's a plague. And so, but you don't see any of that happen. I mean, understandably, it's 1922 and not a great budget, but
right.
like you don't see any of the violence. So it's all that creeping dread instead of like bloody, scary violence going on.
And the fun part about Dracula, I mean, anyone you go up to on the street, even if they've never seen a movie, they or a Dracula type movie,
never seen movie.
They know the rules.
Yeah,
they know about the steak. They know about the light. They know about the garlic.
Yes.
And for the amount of time that this movie spends showing us pages of rules from the Book of Vampires,
yeah,
none of those rules come into play at the end of the film. It doesn't feel like a puzzle payoff. I'm not expecting it to be a jigsaw monologue at the end of that, but
right.
This was emotionally unsatisfying and felt cheap in the same way the book did.
Yeah.
Versus if you compare it to the 1931, which is only 8 years after this, the Bela Lugosi Dracula ends much better. There is more violence. It's the whole team hunting him down, and Van Helsing sticks him with a stake. That involves more of the cast. It does have more of a satisfying combat death. It feels more complete and exciting. It's interesting that they pared down the cast so much here, but didn't... Like, the paring down of the cast feels like a commentary on the book, or a sort of an editorial decision to improve it and tighten it up. But I don't feel like they made any effort to improve on the ending. No,
they just changed it, but it still has the same kind of lame effect.
Because they do a good job making Renfield a more important character here. And the Bela Lugosi movie takes that way further.
Yeah.
It heightens the film's focus and the story's focus on him so much that it's Renfield who goes to the Dracula house visit at the beginning of the story. It's not Harker.
Right.
So you develop that relationship instead of introducing your protagonist. And I think the Bela Lugosi version is a much better story than this one, and it has those shocking black and white reveal sequences of Bela Lugosi walking down the stairs. But I thought Nosferatu was a much scarier, cooler, freakier Dracula than Bela Lugosi.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just if we're just talking visuals, I think this is a better version. I mean,
which I did not think I was going to feel that way, because I love the Bela Lugosi version. I've seen that a bunch. I grew up with all the Universal horror movies. But let's talk about Nosferatu for a second.
Yeah.
He is incredibly tall.
Yeah.
He's got this big, long coat. He's crazy skinny.
Big head,
bald.
hunched shoulders.
Yeah, big, tight, hunched shoulders. It looks tense all the time. He's got these hooded eyes. And instead of just having sharp, triangular teeth, they almost feel like little strips.
Yeah.
Like, his teeth are more long than they are sharp.
And it's not just the two canines. Like, it's all of his teeth are, like, long and pointy and gross.
It's genuinely freaky.
Yeah.
And he's always got his eyes open. I think he maybe blinks once in the movie. He's got this, like, spider quality.
Yeah, and his fingers are all extra long with the
like spider legs.
nails.
Right.
Yeah.
He's just freaky. And his face, because he's got the hooded eyes, because he's got that blank white face, and his eyes are so open, and you see all the shots of his mouth, which look so dark, next to the brilliant white of these exaggerated teeth, his face has so much black and white contrast that even if it wasn't for great creature design, he would be the most visually interesting thing in the movie.
Yeah.
But they're shining their spotlight on this guy, and he's giving them even more than that.
Yeah.
He's so interesting to look at.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's several shots in this movie that are, like, genuinely unsettling.
The shadow work of
and
him
like,
with those long nails.
And when he's, like, when Harker finds his coffin and you just see his face kind of poking out, like, that was really freaky. Like, a lot of these shots could be in a modern horror movie.
Right.
And would work beautifully.
Because a lot of it comes down to the acting and the lighting, and that technology doesn't change much over time. We talked about before with the Michael Myers comparison, the kind of slow movement of Nosferatu here. His walking, seeing his shadow move along the wall, it's so slow and fluid. But anytime he has to interact with the world, the actions of the character are almost filmed in stop motion.
Yeah.
Where we see these jagged cuts of the coffin opening or a door opening.
Yeah. And part of that, I think, is just the special effects, and they have to look like it's opening on its own. Right. But I also think it's but it has an effect. It makes
Yes,
it feel
it's special.
unnatural and eerie. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is a special effect. It gives a flash of the other. Your brain recognizes, like, that's not right. That's not how it moves.
That's not normal.
But it's not like you're seeing the strings on a puppet. It doesn't feel like bad CGI.
Yeah.
It's eerie and surreal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a brilliant and apparently, judging by the production details you said, a very economical.
Yeah.
But a great way to tap into that eerie feeling. And that choppy motif of his unnatural movement and interaction, it makes that lo-fi, no-budget death scene where he looks out round at the mirror, he disappears or looks out the window, sees the sun, disappears from the scene, and then you see some smoke on the ground. It doesn't look like a black box Playhouse production because you've established that motif and the jaggedness of the movement.
Yeah.
So it feels like they're embracing their limitation and creating a visual language around it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's really scrappy filmmaking.
Yeah. I think the one, because there are lots of special effects in this movie. Like, obviously there's all the doors and coffins and stuff, but there are multiple instances where Dracula, Nosferatu, whatever, like, disappears.
Yeah,
that happens when he's on the boat, like when he's down in what do you call it, the bottom of the boat, the
brig,
the rafters, the cabin,
the
I don't
hold
know. Yeah, sure, down in the ship,
lower decks.
That's probably it. Lower decks. I didn't learn ship terminology in school. I guess I was sick that day, but
I learned from the Pirates of the Caribbean.
I was gonna say
movies.
that's my entire
Throw 'em in
base
the
of
brig.
knowledge.
Yeah.
I still don't know port, bow. I don't give a shit. Anyway, he's down there and he's like sitting on the coffins and he like appears at one moment and it's very cool and weird.
He fades in.
Yeah, but so then when he fades out with the sun, I thought he was just teleporting. Like, I didn't realize he was dead until Renfield says the master is dead. And then the movie ended and I was like, oh. And so I think that was sort of I think I wouldn't have minded that ending if it hadn't been. There were lots of other instances where he disappeared and reappeared. So it was just confusing for me.
But that fade in, that special effects, it doesn't feel like choppy, scrappy, low budget.
No, it's really well
making.
done.
It fits within the motif and the visual language of the film because you've got almost a square aspect ratio. You've got all this weird circular lighting with this tight focus on everything, these beautiful compositions. And almost everything fades in and fades out. We talked about it being a collection of actions or shots, not even full scenes.
Yeah.
Every one of those shots fades in and fades out.
Yeah.
So when Dracula starts fading in and fading out of shots, it's doubling down on an aesthetic you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
It feels like an echo.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it's breaking the visual language. I was really impressed with how consistent so much of this movie felt.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's anything negative I said about Nosferatu is something you can say about literally any movie they've ever made about Dracula because they all face the same challenges. The beginning of the book, the beginning of the story, the Harker and Dracula at the castle, that whole visit is captivating.
Yes.
And I've seen that done well almost everywhere. I mean, it's done extremely well in the Coppola movie with Gary Oldman as Dracula. That works great. The Bela Lugosi version.
Seen that. I would love to see that.
I think
Gary
you'd like
Oldman.
it a lot. That one does it great. The Bela Lugosi version's great. This one does it quite well. It's just after that where you either have to cut every character and just make it a nice hunting scene and have him hit him with the stake. Or you get so distracted by establishing all the other characters that you've just lost the tension and focus.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happened when I read the book.
Exactly.
I was like,
it's the problem with the
I
story.
don't care about Dr. Seward and Mina Harker. Like, can we just move on to the vampire?
Because it goes from being this riveting one-act play to like a sprawling ensemble cast.
Yeah.
It
doesn't work.
No, it's too hard a shift.
Yeah.
And I do like that this movie tried to keep that tight focus, also making it an 80-minute movie when half of that is staring at text on a screen. Like, it does mean that it is a great boiled-down version of the story. It's just a crazy hard challenge.
Yeah.
Because that hook has captured imaginations for hundreds of years.
Yeah, it's an amazing setup and it's an amazing character and creature to invent and to riff upon folklore. But
if you just made it like a cat and mouse thing, where Harker realizes what's going on when he's at Dracula's castle and he tries to escape. And Dracula realizes he's going to go tell people and then he's not going to be safe anymore.
Yeah.
just make it like the end of Chainsaw, where Leatherface is chasing the girl through the house and the surrounding land.
Or have like Mina come and try to save him, and then he bites her, and then Harker can't escape because he's got to save Mina.
Have Mina show up like Scatman Crothers in The Shining, and Dracula hits him in the chest. Like,
exactly, yeah.
If you did it like that and kept that one-act play energy, you made it under 90 minutes, maybe 3 characters.
Yeah.
I feel like that is the platonic ideal of Dracula for me, because my eyes glaze over every single time it goes beyond those 3 characters.
Yeah, me too.
This was a remarkably tight and scrappy adaptation of this story.
Yeah, it was.
And for being 100 years ago, when audiences had a completely different relationship with art, when the economy of art was so different, attention spans were so different, I was very invested in this the whole time.
Yeah, no, I was too. If you haven't seen this, which most people haven't, people know about it and have seen images, but most people haven't sat down and watched this movie.
Right.
Like, you should do it. It's really cool. And if you watched a version where, I don't know, the characters had different names, let us know. Because I would like to like watch a different version and see how they compare.
Like the sepia tone.
Yeah,
German
or the
one.
green one,
Right.
or like a different score, or I don't know. Like, I didn't dig into the exact, nuances with all the different versions.
There's also a David Lynch remake of this from the 70s, which I'd like to look at.
And Robert Eggers is trying to do one, but there's been some problems with the production.
Yeah, it was supposed to be filming right now, which is frustrating.
Yes, it is, because it would be so cool.
I know.
I hope he's able to make it one day, because that would be amazing.
I'd like to look at other adaptations of this story, because I've been chewing on it for so many years.
I also now want to watch The Shadow of the Vampire, which is about the making. I mean, it's a fictional version of the making of this movie.
Right. So it's like a behind-the-scenes thing about the crew making the movie, but the idea is the actor who's playing Nosferatu is an actual vampire.
Yeah.
And the director made sort of a Faustian deal, and the Dracula character, or I guess real vampire, is Willem Dafoe.
Yeah.
And we were going to do these as like a double feature and talk about both of these movies, but it's literally not available anywhere to stream or rent even.
Yeah. So I don't know how to find it.
I was looking at like VHS copies on eBay, which would involve other problems without a VHS player, but
I think my parents have one. We could borrow it.
I mean, we might go on this sort of vision quest to find this movie,
because I want to watch this movie. It sounds so cool.
I want to see Willem Dafoe do this.
on YouTube or something.
I didn't look that way, but I guess
listen, if I've tried to buy it and I can't, I've tried to pay for my art and no one's giving me the option.
The Nosferatu production company would approve of copyright infringement and piracy, so sure.
It's in the spirit of the story.
As an ode to them.
Yeah, that's my reasoning.
Cool.
Anyway,
all right.
This was fun. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for Summerween.
I like that we ended with a classic.
Me too.
That we hadn't seen.
And we started with like a new movie. We started with The Ritual.
Oh, yeah. That was so good.
That was good. Anyway, we're definitely doing this again next summer.
Totally.